right. Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for attending the conference today. My name is Rudy Lee, one of the senior biotech research analysts at Chardan. So joining us today is Dr. Pavel Klein, one of the top KOLs in the epilepsy space. So before we start, our compliance team has asked me to read this statement for today's call. So by participating in this event, our speaker attests that they have made Chardan aware of any potential conflicts, and they will not discuss any material, non-public, or confidential information that they're aware of that may breach their legal, regulatory, or fiduciary responsibility to any parties. So if you have any questions during the call, feel free to tap in the chat box and I'll ask for you. And a recording of the call will be available later after the event. All right. So, Doctor, just to kickstart, maybe you can give the audience a brief introduction of your background, practice, and experience.
Sure. Thank you so much. So thank you for the opportunity to talk to you all. I am a neurologist who specializes in epilepsy. I trained in the UK at Cambridge Medical School, and then I did my residency and epilepsy fellowship at the University of Virginia, and then subsequent fellowships in neuroendocrinology and sleep at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center at Harvard. I was the director of the epilepsy program at Georgetown University before I set up my own epilepsy center in 2003, the Mid-Atlantic Epilepsy and Sleep Center, which is located in Bethesda. And we specialize in the treatment of epilepsy. There is 6 providers there, and we do both clinical work and clinical research.
Cool. So how many patients are you actively treating, and what percentage of them are focal onset seizures?
So my patient population is roughly 1,500 patients, and roughly 75% of them are focal.
Great. So let's just start with focal onset seizures. I mean, that's apparently the most common seizure type for epilepsy. Can we just talk about the disease state, diagnosis, and current treatment landscape? Like, what are the standard of care, first line, second line products, and what are the unmet needs there?
Sure. So epilepsy as a whole affects roughly 1% or just under 1% of the population, both in the US and globally, maybe a little more so in the underdeveloped countries. It's an end product of any number of diseases that can cause altered CNS function, increased excitability, increased synchronization of neuronal activity that can ultimately result in seizures. Epilepsy is defined as 2 or more unprovoked seizures, or 1 or more unprovoked seizures with a high likelihood of more seizures. So the etiology of epilepsy is varied, and it includes things such as acute injury, like head injury, traumatic brain injury, stroke, or infection, where you've got an acute insult to the brain that leads to reorganization of the brain, and then down the road to epilepsy. That makes up for about 20% of all epilepsy. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got genetic disorders, some which we made up talking about today, that are increasingly identified and make up a significant, although at the moment not clearly defined portion of all epilepsy. And then in between, you've got things like brain tumors, infections, malformations due to migration disorders that lead to malformation of brain. So a large other body of causes of epilepsy. The prognosis of epilepsy in general is favorable. So roughly 2/3 of all patients respond to a medication, meaning they stop having seizures. Roughly 1/3 don't. And it's primarily the 1/3 that we're sort of focusing on now, because we do have good treatment for the other 2/3. So that's by way of introduction.
Right, that's very helpful. I mean, I know most patients, especially the 1/3 who are like refractory, they're taking multiple products at the same time. So I'm just curious, how long normally do patients stay on one product, and what are the reasons for discontinuation?
So that's a very good question, and there's a huge variability in how epilepsy is treated, and that goes for, I think, all diseases, whereby at one end of the spectrum, you've got inner Boston, where everybody will have seen 15 doctors, so all of them at Harvard, and will have received a change of treatment every every time they have a seizure. At the other end, you've got rural Kansas, where they may see either primary care doctor or general neurologist who have different criteria, and maybe having a seizure every 2 months is fine, and they may not change medication for 15 years. So there's a large range of how treatment of epilepsy is practiced, and it does depend on the providers. Some providers will be happy continuing with one medication and recurrent seizures. Other people will change as soon as you've got a seizure, which obviously is a manifestation of suboptimally controlled epilepsy or uncontrolled epilepsy.
Makes sense. Can you actually share some feedbacks on newly approved products for focal onset seizures? So apparently, Xcopri is one of the most exciting branded products in the space. So what is your real-world experience with Xcopri?
It's as good as the studies. So we were lucky enough in that we took part in all three of the pivotal studies. And so have experience with the medication going back to 2012. The real world experience bears the findings of the pivotal studies. It is a game changer. It has allowed a significant proportion of patients who had previously not responded completely to a large number of medications to become seizure-free or virtually seizure-free. By virtually seizure-free, I mean somebody who has no seizures. They go on vacation to Las Vegas, they forget their medication at home, and they have a seizure because they're not taking the medication. So Xcopri has been a breakthrough in treatment of epilepsy. Now, that said, not everybody becomes seizure-free with it. The seizure freedom estimates range from maybe 10 to 25% long term, and another significant proportion of patients have a high degree of seizure reduction, maybe by 90%. That's maybe altogether about between these two categories, maybe a third of all patients who previously had refractory epilepsy who may respond in that way to Xcopri. So it still leaves a significant proportion of patients who don't respond to it. Nevertheless, it has been a game changer.
Right. So most of patients were able to titrate up to the max dose and be well tolerated.
So in the pivotal trials, the maximum dose was 400 milligrams. In the real world, you don't always need to get there. There is, in the refractory patients, a dose-response relationship whereby you have a higher proportion of patients who become seizure-free when you use the 400 milligram dose versus 200 milligrams dose. In the pivotal studies, which only last 12 weeks, the difference was 21% of patients seizure-free at 400 milligrams versus 11% at 200 milligrams. But in the real world, you may not need to go to the highest dose. Some patients respond at low dose. Some patients respond at significantly lower doses. So you sort of use an individual judgment.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. So what percentage of your patients are taking Xcopri now? And for patients who are not on this product, what are the reasons for now starting the drug or discontinuation?
So in my practice, virtually everybody who has uncontrolled seizures either is on Xcopri or has tried and failed Xcopri. Now, that leaves out a large proportion of patients who are controlled with other medications for whom Xcopri is not needed. But I would say that probably a third of my patients have been or are on Xcopri.
Well, that's a good number. Let's talk about the pipeline products, right? So we already have multiple classes approved, including Xcopri and also different mechanisms like sodium channel blocker, GABA modulators. Now we are introducing a new mechanism, the KV7 modulators. So we have Xenon's XEN1101 or azetukalner and Biohaven's BHV7000. So what do you think about this mechanism? How do you like the drug profile so far, both efficacy and safety versus standard of care?
So whenever you have a drug with a new mechanism of action, it's always exciting because you hope that you have found the nail that will solve the problem.
Right.
If you just hammer it in. With azetukalner, azetukalner is now sort of in the relatively late stage of development. So we have had a fair amount of exposure to it. Again, full disclosure, our center has taken part in the phase 2 and phase 3 studies of azetukalner and are taking part in the praxis, in the biohaven studies also. Uh,
Mhm.
uh, s- uh, You've seen the results. The results look promising. And so I think it's a very hopeful situation where we have one drug on the market, Xcopri, that has done a tremendous amount to help patients with uncontrolled epilepsy. And we've got others in the pipeline that may be useful for those patients who still don't respond. Uh,
Right,
the published data on azetukalner is very favorable, and so the hope is that it'll be that we'll be able to use it to help those patients who still continue not to respond to currently available medications.
right. I mean, the phase 2 data looks pretty robust, like especially the efficacy regarding seizure reduction. I'm curious. So the phase 3 data will be coming fairly maybe early 2026. So what is the bar for the upcoming readout? I mean, what percentage of seizure reduction or seizure freedom rates are you looking for?
So I can't sort of comment on the studies, obviously, but I think the Xcopri has raised the bar, whereby
Right.
before the bar, which is also the bar that's used by the regulatory agencies, both in Europe and to a lesser degree in the US, has been 50% seizure frequency reduction or greater. Uh,
Mhm.
that is no longer the clinical bar. So it still is the regulatory bar. But
Mhm.
it's, clinically, if I have somebody who's got 50% frequency reduction of X, it's not really what I'm interested in. I'm interested in 90% seizure frequency reduction, seizure freedom, and below that 75% seizure frequency reduction. And I think the bar is set by the data in the Xcopri studies,
Right.
which we just discussed.
Right. So I want to chat about the differentiation between Azetukalner versus Biohaven's BHV 7000, right? Apparently, the company believes that BHV 7000 could be differentiated with its higher selectivity and minimal impact on GABA receptors. And does it make sense to you? And how should we think about the drug profile?
So in theory, it does make sense. In practice, in epilepsy, we still are not in a situation where the animal data can 100% correctly predict clinical outcome. I'll give you
Mhm.
an example. Xcopri is a member of a chemical family called carbamates. Uh,
Right.
same company that owns and developed Xcopri, SK Life Sciences, owns and developed another molecule in the same family, charisbamate.
Mhm.
Charisbamate and cenobamate have very similar profile in terms of seizure treatment success in animal models. Very similar, right across the different animal models. Yet in
Mhm.
clinical studies, charisbamate basically failed the focal epilepsy phase 3 studies, and cenobamate has cleared it with a high mark. We don't really know why. So this is
Mhm.
a long-winded way of saying that the rationale that Biohaven is using for potentially a favorable outcome of clinical studies may be true, but we don't know and will not know until we have the results of the clinical studies.
Right. There's still some moving parts there, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it already showed kind of improved safety. I'm just curious what kind of efficacy would be adequate. I'd say, is it okay if the magnitude of effect is lower, say maybe 30% seizure reduction in that range? Is that okay?
Yeah, but I'm not sure that I understood you correctly. 30% seizure frequency reduction?
Yeah, if Biohaven shows 30% seizure reduction, would that be adequate for you to use that product?
No. It would not. Now, that said, you may have a drug where overall you've got a 30% seizure frequency reduction, but you have some patients who become seizure free. We don't understand the mechanisms of drug resistance. So it's very much a trial and error business. So if I have patients who failed 15 medications, including Xcopri, and I may try Biohaven, even if it's got 30% seizure frequency reduction overall, if I know that there have been some patients who have become
Yeah,
free on it. Now,
right.
if the 30% seizure frequency reduction is combined with zero seizure freedom, then I think that would impact the use
Mhm.
negatively.
Right. So I don't want to put word in your mouth, but let's say if even if it show a good safety, you still want to see maybe 50% seizure reduction to feel comfortable, right, for Biohaven's product.
Again, the bar has been set higher with Xcopri.
Right.
50% seizure frequency reduction is no longer impressive.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. So I also want to talk about the label expansion opportunities for KV7 beyond focal onset seizures. So we know there are many focal onset seizure drugs that also approved for generalized seizures. Do you think KV7 also works in generalized epilepsy?
So from the animal models, the indication is that it should work in generalized epilepsy also. As you know, the studies are ongoing, so I can't comment on it. And as I sort of keep repeating myself, please forgive me, the proof will be in the pudding.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. So what about major depressive disorder or MDD, right? We already have data from multiple phase 2 trials with kind of mixed results. Do you think it could work in MDD, and how important is the MDD indication?
So the MDD indication is important. It's a very significant proportion of patients with epilepsy, particularly patients with uncontrolled epilepsy, have depression as comorbidity, anxiety as comorbidity, bipolar as comorbidity, and those disorders add very significantly to the disease burden. So many patients will say that the depression is worse than the seizures. So if you have a drug that addresses both conditions successfully, that would be a very significant addition. Now we have such drugs now, lamotrigine, Depakote, both are indicated for bipolar affective disorder as well as for epilepsy, and both are very useful. Clinically, the carbamazepine family of drugs has a mood elevating effect. Nevertheless, if you have a medication that is successful in treating depression as well as epilepsy, that would be very welcome.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. All right, so switching gears to another class, sodium channel blockers. So um, Praxis has a product called Vormatrigine. So this is the company's next generation sodium channel blocker designed with functional selectivity. Again, does the mechanism make sense? Do you think it could be best in class, be better, or me too, just based on current evidence? Any comments there?
So it could be either me too or best in class. And again, which way it goes will depend on the outcome of the study. So the theoretical rationale for hoping that maybe best in class is the fact that it's got higher potency of action in animal studies against the proposed major mechanism of action of Xcopri, which is the modulation of a part of sodium current called persistent sodium current.
Mm-hmm.
And there, the motrigine has a higher potency than Xcopri, than cenobamate. And if that translates into higher efficacy in clinical studies, that would be great. But I would also inject a note of caution there. High potency at a ligand, it does not always translate to higher efficacy. And a good example of that is levetiracetam. So the second generation levetiracetam, brivaracetam, has got tenfold higher potency in binding to the presumed ligand of mechanism of action of levetiracetam and brivaracetam, the synaptic vesicle protein 2A.
Mm-hmm.
Yet the efficacy is not 10 times higher than levetiracetam. So,
Right.
the animal data would suggest that lamotrigine may be a phenomenal drug, but we'll have to see how it pans out in the clinical studies.
Right. So it has an ongoing phase 2 study in roughly 50 patients. The data is coming in mid-year. And this is an open label trial for 8-week treatment. So kind of still want to ask the same question. So what kind of efficacy data do you look for to feel more comfortable on the drug profile, like regarding seizure reduction, responder, seizure freedom rates?
So, full disclosure, we take part in the study, so we're involved in the study. So I can't
Uh,
comment on the study, but the bar would be the similar as what we discussed with azetukalner. It's set by Xcopri. You need to have a significant 75% seizure frequency reduction to 100% seizure frequency reduction for it to be considered competitive with Xcopri. Again, not to say that if you don't have those results, and you do have some patients who have great response, you would use the drug, but you wouldn't use it to replace Xcopri. You'd use it in patients who failed Xcopri as a last hope.
right. So, so overall, which of these products in focal onset seizures are you mostly excited about that we just talked about?
That's a really tough question because, as I've said before, it's really difficult to predict the outcome of the clinical studies from the animal data.
Mm,
And all three of these drugs that we've discussed are very hopeful. But whether or not that hope will translate into clinical success remains to be seen based on the study results when they're published.
right. I mean, it's maybe a little bit too early. I kind of want to ask about what kind of market share or what percentage of your patients are you planning to use these new mechanism products, let's say maybe after 5 years on the market?
Right. That's a good question. So, uh, as you know, roughly 35% of patients with focal epilepsy are uncontrolled, were
Mm,
uncontrolled before Xcopri. If you assume conservatively that Xcopri achieves seizure freedom in about 10% of patients,
mm,
then that sort of proportion of patients with refractory epilepsy goes down to roughly 32%.
mm,
If you have a medication that's phenomenally effective, that will be the market share, or maybe more if they're more effective and better tolerated and easier to use than Xcopri. Uh,
mm.
if not, then you'll be left with that roughly 30% of patients who may still need further treatment.
Right.
And
Um,
I would sort of add another caveat to that. Uh, Neurologists as a bunch are a conservative bunch.
yeah.
So the uptake of Xcopri has been extraordinarily slow, considering that it's such a great breakthrough drug. Uh, we are using it very little. So uh, 4 years into the commercial launch of Xcopri, you have
Mhm.
less than 10% of eligible patients in the US using it. 4 years.
Right.
You've got roughly 1 million patients in the US with uncontrolled epilepsy. Uh, the proportion of patients being treated with Xcopri at 4 year mark was significantly less than 100,000, is 100,000 globally.
Mhm.
So you sort of add the conservatism of neurologists to it, and then you sort of balance the efficacy with the hesitancy of neurologists to adopt a new treatment. If the medication is dramatically effective, you can expect hopefully a faster uptake than with Xcopri because hopefully we'll learn from the slow uptake of Xcopri. But
Right.
if it's less, then the proportion of patients who may be using it at 5 year mark is likely to be less than 10% of that 1 million.
Right. My understanding is that Alcapre's slow growth trajectory is partially due to this, the set effect and the slow titration. Do you think the KB7 could potentially ramp up faster because of like a clean safety profile?
So potentially yes, but it's a qualified statement. So the slow titration matters when you start a patient on new medication. You've
Mm-hmm.
got a 26-year-old, you've got a 21-year-old woman who's got 3 seizures in the middle of her exams, and she needs something fast to get the seizures under control. then you're going to use a medication that can be titrated very quickly, like let's say brivaracetam, where you don't need titration. You would not use Xcopri. However, take this same woman who four medications haven't helped, and she's now 30, and you're trying to find something, anything that
Mhm.
will get her seizure free. Then
Right.
the 2 month titration or 3 month titration really don't matter. So
Mhm.
the lack of titration with azetukalner and vormatrigine, I think, and Barhaven would be an advantage, but not a deal breaker.
Got it. We also have a couple of questions from the audience, so maybe you can quickly help clarify. First is regarding KV7 questions. A subgroup analysis of acetylcholine phase 2 data showed that it showed greater efficacy in patients who failed less than 6 anti-seizure drugs versus those who failed more than 6 anti-seizure drugs. So do you think this applies to all anti-seizure products? And
I
how does this impact your drug selection for a given patient?
I think it does, and I think we've seen this across a number of different medications. We did studies of a similar kind with brivaracetam. There have been similar studies done with other anti-seizure medications.
Mhm.
Basically, if you have patients who have failed seven or more anti-seizure medications before in the azetukalner analysis 6, you've got a patient population that is really refractory. And for
Mhm.
reasons that we don't quite understand, more so than if you failed five or four or three anti-seizure medications. Um, the so the fact that you've got slightly less response with us azetukalner with those patients is not new and wouldn't really impact the uptake.
Mhm. And the second question is for vormatrigine. Do you see potential combination use on top of other sodium channel blockers?
So sodium channel blockers are sort of the second most widely used group of medications after the racetams. And so you will have situations where you've got vormatrigine and sodium channel blocker combined. Uh, if anything, uh, it may go the opposite direction. So, for instance, with lacosamide, Vimpat,
Mm.
there were studies, which was approved back in 2009. There were studies early on that showed that the efficacy was not better when it's combined with other sodium channel blockers compared to non-sodium channel blocking mechanisms of action drugs, but the side effects were greater. So
Mm.
you've got potentiation of side
Yeah,
effects and not potentiation of efficacy. And
yeah.
uh, is a little bit of an argument along similar lines with Xcopri, whereby the one of the two medications where you've got the greatest potential for side effects when it's used with Xcopri is lacosamide. And
Mhm.
the explanation is thought to be a similar mechanism of action leading to accumulation of side effects.
Right, makes sense. One last question from the audience is, Rapport Therapeutic has a drug called RAP219 targeting AMPA.
Yeah.
Phase 2 data coming in September. What's your expectation? Any comments there?
Yeah, so it's exciting. It's another novel mechanism of action. The study is different from other early phase 2 studies. It's the first in kind, if you like, whereby they are looking not so much at clinical seizures as the primary efficacy outcome, as they are at reduction of electrophysiologically recorded long episodes of neuronal firing documented with response neurostimulator device implanted in patients' brains as treatment of epilepsy. But it is a new mechanism of action and exciting as such.
Cool. All right. Let's talk about a different topic. Rare pediatric epilepsy, such as like Dravet, LGS, and the broader DE indication, like covering a basket of severe epilepsy. So, first, maybe just briefly, any comments, feedbacks on newly approved products for this, such as like Fintepla, Epidiolex?
So the rare epilepsy space has been a busy space for the last maybe 6, 7 years. And part of it is due to Epidiolex, which by virtue of its uh, nature, CBD has generated a huge amount of social interest and a huge amount of uptake. And nevertheless, the efficacy of Epidiolex is not that fantastic.
Mm,
However, we've had a breakthrough anti-seizure medication in that space with fenfluramine, Fintepla, where the response of the Dravet patients has been remarkable and I would say breakthrough compared to previously available treatments. That remarkable response with Fintepla does not appear to be mirrored in some of the other rare epilepsies such as Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, where the efficacy with Fintepla is significantly less than the efficacy that we see with Dravet syndrome. Nevertheless, Fintepla has changed the landscape for rare epilepsies in a way that's sort of similar to how Excopri has changed it for focal epilepsies. And
mm,
the activity in the space is fantastic, and we hope for better outcomes still.
cool. I mean, apparently Fintepla is still like the gold standard for Dravet syndromes, but I want to spend more time talking about a peptide product from Stoke Therapeutics, STK001 of zoroanosine. So
Right.
this is an ASO for treating SCM1A Dravet syndrome. So the biology actually makes a lot of sense to me. Actually, do you think it could become the first disease-modifying therapy for Dravet based on current evidence on not only seizure reduction but also non-seizure benefits?
So it would be wonderful if it were. The efficacy data for Stoke 001 is impressive. The uh, disadvantages are the intrathecal injections, which have to be repeated and are not a small matter. Uh, because of that, I think you have to have a uh, outcome that is significantly differentiating from other treatments. Uh,
Right.
the disease modification, I think, is yet to be, in my mind, is yet to
Mhm.
be demonstrated. So there's been a lot of talk about it. Uh, However, you don't have at the moment much by way of data that would show that you've given STK001 for 6 months, you stop taking it, and six years later, you still have the reduction of seizures that you had when you were using it, which is really what disease modification is
Mm,
about. If you have other beneficial effects on the disease, cognitive impairment, etc., that'd be fantastic. You see a little bit of that with fenfluramine, but it's not been that superbly documented. So anything that will help the disease, in addition and over and above seizure burden reduction, would be uh, would be a major success. Uh,
right. But I think it already showed pretty strong seizure reduction on a very long duration. But regarding disease modifying effect, like you mentioned, like there are so many moving parts in the trial design. But do you think the one-eye score will be the right endpoint to measure the non-seizure benefits?
yes, I think it would be. I think it would be. Yeah.
Right, right. So when we have more data from the pivotal trial, I think that would support disease modifying effect. But I think so far, the biology, the long duration, and the strong efficacy all make sense to me. So I think this is
Right.
very promising.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about the safety? Do you think it has demonstrated a clean safety?
So
I think
far,
people were talking about the CSF protein elevation. Do you think it will be a hurdle in practice?
the way, if you go by the results that are in the public domain so far, the answer would be no. But you don't know what will happen once the drug's approved. And if it is something that would need to be watched pretty carefully. There's been one patient that sort of withdrew from the study because of the elevated CSF protein. But time and again, we've seen something in studies that then turns out to be much more significant in real world than it was in the studies.
Mhm.
So it is a note of caution. And generally speaking, the repeated injections are a potential handicap.
Mm-hmm. So you think that could be a hurdle in practice? Like, because Fintempla is oral, apparently.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. You're dealing with a group of the patients with catastrophic disease. And not
Mm-hmm.
only do you have the seizures, not only do you have the horrible encephalopathy, you've got increased risk of SUDEP, increased risk of death. So I think that sort of uh, adds weight on the side of intervention, even if the intervention means intrathecal injections, if the intervention is such as to really mitigate the disease burden significantly.
Right. So I will ask the same question. If this product is approved, what percentage of Dravet patients you think would be on this product?
Uh, Good question. I think uh, depending on the landscape at the time when it's approved, and it's quite possible that fenfluramine will not be the only treatment. Fintepla will not be only
Mm,
treatment
yeah.
that will be new at that point. So let's assume several scenarios. Let's assume that there's no other treatment approved, and then the competitors is Fintempla.
Mm,
I think it would be used quite widely. You do have the element of conservatism of both neurologists and potentially the caregivers, and it's sort of quite interesting that though you've got catastrophic disease, the
mhm,
safety concerns by the caregivers, meaning usually parents,
mhm.
is also paramount. That's an important consideration. If you assume that there is one or more other products that are oral that have similar efficacy, then I think that would negatively impact the uptake of STK-001.
Mhm. Right. I mean, given that, like, I think at least one third of patients have still treatment refractory and they are taking multiple products. Does it make sense that at least those one third of patients will be like low-hanging fruit start as you have a disease modifying therapy, then over time you may have a broader adoption across.
I think so. I think so. We've seen similar sort of slow uptake of fenfluramine as we in the Dravet patients as we did with Xcopri and focal epilepsy. So
Mhm.
years into approval of fenfluramine, you had roughly under 1,000 people with Dravet treated with it in the US out of roughly the 20,000 that there are. So the
Mhm.
uptake for fenfluramine was similarly slow to Xcopri.
Right. Um, One last question for Stoke was, how do you think about the potential competition from the AAV gene therapy, which is still in early stage development, like such as in Cody Therapeutics?
Right. So it really depends on both the efficacy and safety. You've got potential for greater safety concerns with AAV gene therapy.
Mm,
So it depends on the efficacy. If the efficacy is similar to Stokes, then probably Stoke will have a significant advantage. But if it's dramatically better, then that would not be the case.
right, right. And lastly, I want to chat about the programs that you mentioned that FinTech is probably not the only program for Dravet, but also there are a couple of programs pursuing both Dravet and a broad label covering like DEE, like such as Lundbeck-Lomborg's bexicaserin, which is also a FASHE2C agonist. Then we have Brian Matt Bioscience has BMB 101, a similar mechanism. Plus, Praxis has Relution, which is a sodium channel blocker. I mean, my question is, does it make sense to pursue a broad label for all types of DEE, given the heterogeneity of that disease, and how would that change the treatment landscape?
So I think it does make sense. So you can approach uh, very specifically caused diseases such as Dravet, where you've got one gene, one protein dysfunction, with targeted treatment. doesn't fall in that category. LGS is a basket of very diverse diseases that end up with similar phenotype of horrible seizures, developmental regression or failure to develop, and an EEG pattern that's sort of characteristic. But in terms of etiology, there's 1,001 etiologies that can cause LGS. So in
Mhm.
that sense, LGS is a broad basket developmental encephalopathy. So I think what Longbourn did made a lot of sense.
Yeah.
You take patients with diverse etiology and one potentially broad mechanism of action to see whether the mechanism of action will address diverse etiology, same as with focal epilepsy that we discussed earlier. So I think it did make sense, and I think is a generally speaking positive development in terms of development of drugs for developmental epileptic encephalopathy.
Mhm.
So I think that I think that's a good development.
Cool. I'm just curious how would that change the treatment landscape, right? So let's say in 3, 4, 5 years, we may have three 5C2C drugs on the market, right? Fintepla already approved for Dravet, LGS. Then you have bexicaserin that may be on the market in 2028, and followed by BMB 101. How should we think about the differentiation of the three and the,
So it's a very good question, and it comes down to efficacy and safety. So Fintepla right now has got that burden of the echocardiograms that need to be done, which is for safety reasons mandated by the FDA. And that's a significant burden. Many of these patients are physically as well as mentally really handicapped. Having them go for an echocardiogram is a challenge and something that people would prefer to avoid. So if the longboard Lundbeck medication comes along and does not need echocardiograms, that would be a differentiator, even if the efficacy is the same as it appears to be at the moment. Uh, if you've got better efficacy, then of course that would be a benefit also. So if you don't, if in 2030 you've got a situation where you've got 5 different treatments for the same patient population, and the efficacy is similar, and the side effect profile is similar, then you'll have a splintering of the market.
right? I'm just thinking about the market dynamic. Then all three could potentially have different labels, different drug profile, right? For example, like Dravet, you have Fintepla and bexicaserin. It would be hard to switch patient from like Fintepla to bexicaserin, or is it hard to switch patient from bexicaserin to BMB 101 because of the drug
Uh,
profile?
So the answer is no, because think about when would you consider switching? You'd consider switching if the first drug, let's say Fintepla, doesn't work.
Mm,
Works, you don't have to switch. If it works, you will want to switch regardless.
right.
Then you'll sort of just go through the treatments based on particular application to your particular patient in terms of etiology, side effect profile, and efficacy. But yeah, the fact that you'd have different treatments, uh, including Fintepla, doesn't mean that you can't switch from one to the other if that particular treatment fails.
Right, but for example, if you're already on Fintepla and the drug's well tolerated, there's no reason for you to switch from Fintepla to bexicaserin, like because it has been on market for a while.
So if Fintepla works, that's correct. If Fintepla doesn't work, then it'll depend on what the studies will show. If you have a situation where you have patients who failed Fintepla and do well upon bexicaserin, then there'd be an argument to move on to bexicaserin even after you've failed Fintepla. So again,
Mhm.
it depends on what the studies will show.
Right. Still same question. So looking forward, if we have all three products on the market, what kind of market share are you thinking for DEE?
Splintered, it'll uh, the market is still large even with Fintepla because the proportion of patients who actually become seizure free with Fintepla is very, very small.
Yeah.
It's 2 to 3%. So basically, the market is similar um, to what it was before Fintepla, not quite, because if you've got patients who've had marked seizure frequency reduction, even though they're not seizure free, the caregivers may not wish to switch. If you take all development encephalopathy, epileptic encephalopathy at arbitrary, let's say 100,000 patients in the US, uh, the and of those 20,000 are Dravet's, where Fintepla really does make the difference, and the other 80,000 are not. Then you've got the 80,000 where Fintepla does not make that much of a difference, and you've got maybe let's say 2/3 of the 20,000 with Dravet's, where Fintepla may not be revolutionary either. So the market will not be that much smaller in 2030 than it is now,
Mhm. Right.
but
So,
it splintered.
right. So Brightmap is reporting data for BMB 101 from the phase 2 open label study later the year. So I'm just curious what kind of data it needs to show in order to move forward.
So you need to show competitive efficacy data with Fintepla.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Right. So that product is also pursuing absence epilepsy. So can maybe talk about that indication, and does it make sense to treat absence with 5-HT2C, and what kind of data are you expecting for that?
That's a very open question because there isn't really any data on absence treatment with.
Right. And this is like a fairly new indication for a lot of this audience.
Right, right. Uh, it'll depend on the outcome of the studies. It's a little bit of it's a step in the unknown. If it works out, great. What is the strength of the data that it will work out? I think not that great. But again, you'll have to see whether what the studies show.
Hmm. Makes sense. Lastly, for Praxis relutrigine, so this is a sodium channel blocker. It is running two programs in parallel. So first is targeting SCN2A and SCN8A-DEE. At the same time, they're trying to do the broader DEE indication as well. So what do you think about this strategy? And this makes sense?
Excuse me. It does make sense. Um, uh, it's a sort of trying to hit as many targets as you can. I hope that one of them will actually land. Uh,
Mhm.
and uh, the scientific rationale is sort of there, but not super strong.
Mhm. Right. So I think to me, it makes more sense to do SCN2A, SCN AA because it's sodium channel blocker. But we
Right.
need to see more data for the broader DE indication. So, right. I think we are running out of time there. But before I let you go, what other pipeline products for any epilepsy indication that you feel excited that you want to highlight? Anything?
Very good question. There's roughly 200 new treatments in development.
Yeah.
So, so it's a very active area for which I'm very grateful. So to sort of pick to pick some randomly out would be injustice to the 199 that you don't talk about. Uh, I think the RNA modulating approach is very interesting. And there's a number of companies and compounds in development. One that I feel quite excited about is modulation of microRNA with microRNA antagonists, so antimers. And there is a couple of developments there that look pretty promising. None of them in the clinic. So there's always the death valley that you may aware a promising treatment may not make it, but it's an area that's pretty promising. Yeah.
Cool. We actually have one more question from the audience, so maybe you can help address. So for BMB 101 has additional feature of BIOS agonism, which avoids the beta-arrestin effect. How important do you think is that feature?
I think it would be important if it pans out, yeah.
Do you have any evidence from other products to support that?
Not at the moment, no.
Okay, cool. All right, this is great, super helpful. Thanks for taking your time, and thanks everyone for joining us today. So if you have any follow-up questions, just shoot me an email at rli@chardan.com. All right, have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.